Alright, so this afternoon, evening, night, whatever time you're doing this, you are going to begin to learn about the Reformation. The Reformation was a time period where they decided it was time to fix the problems within the church. Immediate causes for this were the fact that the merchants' wealth started challenging the church's view of usury, which was borrowing and taking money from people, and then charging interest. You also had the Germans and the English who were very upset at the fact that the Italians seemed to dominate the church. After all, the Roman Catholic Church was in Italy. And then the church and their immense amount of political power and their wealth ended up causing conflict amongst the different monarchs in Italy. Not in Italy, in Europe. Then you had the church corruption and then the sale of indulgences, which started with the Crusades, where it said that you would be freed from your sins. But at this point in time, people are actually selling them, so much so that the priests are just walking on the streets and selling them to drunkards and people very similar on the town streets. You also had simony, which was the sale of church positions. This came back. Pluralism, which was when a church official had more than one position. Absenteeism, you had church officials who are supposed to be there and they're getting everything the church would provide. However, they don't show up. You have the sale of indulgences, we already went over that. It's spelled wrong on the screen. You also have nepotism. Nepotism says that was a time when people would appoint family members to church positions even if they were not necessarily religious. You also had moral decline. You had one of the popes, Pope Alexander VI, who had many children out of wedlock and affairs. Again, that's not supposed to happen in the Catholic Church. Clerical ignorance. Clergy, priest members of the clergy are not literate anymore. And that caused a huge problem. How are they supposed to copy the Bible, conduct services, if they can't read or write? On to our reformers. First, you have Erasmus. You guys have already heard of Desiderius Erasmus. He is called the father of the Reformation. He was a priest. However, he did not agree with the Catholic Church, so he started living a more secular life. He did have the Bible translated back into Latin, because he agreed that that was a necessity in terms of understanding the faith. He also criticized the corruption of the church and the hypocrisy that existed within the clergy in his book, The Praise of Folly. And a quote that was in a video I once saw that I want you to remember is that Erasmus laid the egg that Luther hatched. That means here's a situation, here's it ready to get going, but Luther is the one that actually cracked it open and moved it along. Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King. Martin Luther was an Augustinian monk and priest. He was middle class, and it is said that he was so misbehaved that he spent the majority of his time in confession. He had issues with the practice of the church and the rituals required to be a good Catholic. So he starts to come up with his own philosophy. He believed that the Bible was the sole source of Christian truth. All you need to do is read the Bible, follow it, obey it, and you would be a good Christian. This philosophy is called justification by faith. He also believed that there were only two sacraments that were necessary to get into heaven. One was baptism, the other is communion. He didn't have to get married. He didn't have to anoint the sick. He also said that the church should not have to follow the Pope's authority. That was a big no-no. In all these complaints that he had, he wrote the 95 Theses. He then nailed them to the door of the church where he worked, which was Wittenberg Cathedral. Wittenberg Cathedral, by nailing these to the door, well, hold on, let me backtrack. When you nailed something to the door of a church, it was kind of like a message board, a bulletin board where people could find information. So he put it out there for everybody. He said that the Pope is supposed to be God and Jesus' right-hand man. So instead of selling these indulgences that he has done and asking for all this money, why doesn't he emulate Jesus and do it all for free? Now later on, the 95 Thesis gets mass published due to the help of the printing press invented by Gutenberg. Once that all gets out there, Luther is told to take back his statements or recant. Luther says no. He ends up going to trial. He said that the church messed up by executing John Hus. And then later, Luther becomes excommunicated. Now, with all these beliefs that he had, he ends up laying the foundation for the first Protestant faith out there. It's called Protestant because you are protesting against what the Catholic Church had. And that first faith is Lutheranism. Again, he said that you need justification or salvation by faith alone. The Bible is the only source of religious truth. He said that services should be conducted in the vernacular rather than Latin because not everyone knows Latin. As a result, many German states in the north are going to adopt Lutheranism. German princes were politically motivated because they were trying to escape the authority of the Catholic Church so that they could confiscate their lands. Southern Germany, however, does remain Catholic. Denmark and Sweden will become Lutheran, but it did not go really much beyond Germany, North Germany, or Scandinavia. Our next reformer is John Calvin. John Calvin came 2 decades after Martin Luther. He was appealing to many of the Protestants that spoke English. He was able to expand the movement because of his idea of predestination. And he spoke these words mainly in the region of Switzerland. He then will establish a theocracy in Geneva and create a consistory. To make sure that his views got spread, he tried to make Geneva the model religious center. He created the consistory to control aspects of their daily lives. He will then write the Institutes of the Christian Religion. This is the rallying point of the Reformation. When it was first published in 1536, and then the last edition of it comes out 28 years later in 1564. By this time, it had quadrupled in size because of the following that he gathered. He is then considered to be the greatest theologian of the Reformation. Then we move on to King Henry VIII, a reformer for personal reasons. King Henry VIII wrote the Assertion of the Seven Sacraments. This was basically going against Luther and saying that all 7 sacraments were necessary and that you had to do those in order to get into heaven. As a result, the Pope named him Protector of the Faith. Now, King Henry VIII and the Pope get into an argument when Henry VIII falls in love with a woman other than his wife. Now, with his wife Catherine of Aragon, he has a daughter, Mary the First. But he falls in love and he needs a male heir. And every time Catherine had a child, it was a female, or it was dead, or they didn't end up surviving. Mary becomes the only surviving child. So he asks for a divorce. The Pope says no. Then he asks for an annulment. He says no. So Henry decides he's going to break away from the church and create his own. That will be the Church of England. Now, I'm going to have you guys also hopefully watch the Music Lady video so you can learn about the different wives. He had many wives. Now, Henry's only surviving male heir, Edward VI, died when he was a teenager. As a result, Mary, his half-sister, becomes queen. Mary was Catholic, so she becomes very violent in an effort to restore Catholicism to England. As a result, that is today we have the whole look in the mirror, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. That is because of her. She is Bloody Mary. She killed many, many people because they were not Catholic. After she died, Elizabeth I becomes queen. Now, some records say that Elizabeth ruled at the same time as Mary, but most say that Elizabeth ruled after Mary died. Now, Elizabeth was a Protestant queen. She did not persecute those that were not Protestant, but she promoted Protestantism within her realm. The Peasants' War. Peasants demand that the Germans put an end to these feudal practices that have been going on, such as serfdom. People were still serfs, even though feudalism is wrong or gone. These peasants are inspired by Luther, but Luther, while he sympathized with them, was actually quite disgusted with the fact that they were so murderous because they were not living the true Christian life. 100,000 peasants ended up dying during the uprising, and the only way to end it was a combination of forces between Lutherans and Catholics. Immediate results in England, Germany, and France. In England, Elizabeth I ends the bloodshed that was initiated by her sister Mary. She will also unite the British Isles under the Anglican Church. Remember that Henry VIII started his own, called the Church of England. It becomes known as the Anglican Church. And as a result, the way she ruled becomes known as Anglicanism. It is not Anglican, it is Anglicanism. And then with this Reformation, it's going to lead to the growth of capitalism within England. Germany. Northern Germany, princes convert to Protestantism, which ends the papal authority in their states. But the ruling Habsburg family will remain Catholic. We also get the 30 Years' War, which is a war between Protestants and Catholics that was devastating in terms of loss of lives. And it will eventually end with the Treaty of Westphalia. In France, we have the Edict of Nantes. The Edict of Nantes allows French Protestants, known as Huguenots, to worship freely. And for long-term results, we have the growth of secularism, individualism, and religious tolerance. So hopefully you can see how this builds on some of the Renaissance ideas or coincides with the Renaissance ideas.